Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, February 12th, 2026. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, homebrewer Omar Al-Nidawi asks for help in taking care of his Cask ale dispensing system. So I've enlisted a couple of experts to give Omar and us some tips. From CAMRA, the Campaign for Real Ale in the UK, comes John O'Donnell, chair of the CAMRA Technical Advisory Group, and Tim Webb, author and chair of the CAMRA Beer and Cider Committee. Along with some technical advice, John and Tim bring us up to date on the state of real ale and craft beer in their part of the world. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing, and many thanks to everybody who's helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. Financial supporters have already seen an early release of the video that Steve and I made about my experimental experiment comparing a hoppy pale ale served from a keg and also bottled conditioned in a bottle. Same beer, different packaging techniques. Spoiler, both versions were really tasty. Financial supporters also got a behind-the-scenes video of how the beer came together and the recipe for the beer as well. And that beer I used leftover hops that Josh Secor from Gambit Brewing in St. Paul, Minnesota sent me. There's not much of that beer left, to tell you the truth. It's really good. If you'll remember, in recent episodes, we've been talking about the Norwegian brewery Nogno, and I've been racking my brain because I knew we'd talked about Nogno on the show in the past, but I couldn't find it in searching the archives or the RSS feed. Well, thankfully, recently I got a very nice note from former Norwegian homebrewer of the year, Jan Halvor Feld, who came on the show way back in 2011 and shared some delicious beers with me. Nogno brewed Jan Halvor's double IPA recipe and called it Two Captains, which was a very delicious beer and well-received by everybody. So that's where the Nogno reference came from. So I'm so happy that that Jan Halvor wrote to me. It was great reconnecting with him. He's apparently still listening to the show, is living in Skane in a house built in 1794, only 10 to 15 minutes a walk from downtown. He says he still brews and has just brewed a Flanders Brown or Ode Bruin. How great is that? Also great is the first seasonal yeast strain from our friends and sponsors at Imperial Yeast. Imperial B45 Gnome is a wonderful Belgian strain that is built for versatility and crystal clear results. Gnome is highly flocculent, which means your delicious Belgian-style brews will be bright without the need for filtration. Gnome is equally at home in highlighting hops in a Belgian IPA or accentuating coffee and caramel notes in a double. Gnome has a balanced profile with classic Belgian flavors that stay approachable and refined. It's available through early March, and while you're at your local homebrew store, check out the new packaging from Imperial. The new packaging gives you plenty of information about each strain, including style suggestions, so you can find the perfect yeast for your brew. You know we love Imperial yeast with 200 billion cells per easy-to-open package. My stir plate is usually dusty because I don't use it anymore generally to make starters for moderate gravity 5-gallon batches, and my airlocks are usually bubbling before bedtime. Ask your local homebrew store about B45 Gnome from Imperial and find all the dependable deliciousness at imperialyeast.com. It's imperialyeast.com. Fans of the archives may remember an episode in 2014 when Neil Walker, then from the Campaign for Real Ale, came on the show to talk about CAMRA. Well, when Omar Al-Nidawi asked for help with his Cask system, I thought this would be an excellent opportunity to reconnect with the organization. Omar Al-Nidawi, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Good to be here with you again, James.
Are you still with the D.C. homebrewers?
Still am.
And in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. And we're here because of you. and that's a good thing. You emailed me a couple weeks ago with a suggestion for a show, and what was the topic that you wanted to address?
The main topic really is how to maintain a cask beer dispensing setup because I've been lucky to have got my hands on a beer engine a few years ago, and there's a lack of information. I think there's not enough information about how to maintain one properly, how to keep it clean and sanitary, which sometimes has discouraged me from using it as frequently as I would like to. So I thought we'll seek some answers from the experts.
Yeah, and you asked me you asked me to get a hold of an expert to come and answer your questions, and I asked you if you'd like to come on too. And so, in a sense, you've asked me for a fly swatter, and I've brought you two sledgehammers because we're talking to we're talking to representatives from the Campaign for Real Ale in the UK. We've got John O'Donnell, chair of the CAMRA Technical Advisory Group. Welcome, John.
Hello.
And we've got Tim Webb, who's chair of the CAMRA Beer and Cider Campaigns Committee and the erstwhile co-author of the World Atlas of Beer and Good Beer Guide Belgium. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, James.
As I said before we started, I'm honored and a little bit intimidated that y'all have agreed to come on and talk about this fairly specific question or issue. And I want to say thanks to Tori Wood with CAMRA for helping to arrange everything. Back in December 4th of 2014, on that episode, I had Neil Walker, then from the Campaign for Real Ale, on. He's, as I understand it now, with the Society of Independent Brewers and Associates. But that was a long time ago. We talked then about who CAMRA is and the mission and goals of the organization. But Tim, do you want to catch us up and refresh our memories on who CAMRA is and what y'all are all about?
Well, we started off 54 years ago. Four journalists on a rather drunken holiday in Ireland decided that British beer was going downhill rapidly and somebody needed to do something about it. And so they formed an organization, never thinking it would really take off. The gist of it in the early days was that cask ale was in those days just about the only decent beer left in the UK. And so for campaigning effectiveness, they concentrated on cask ale. And then I think I know two of these guys who founded it, and I can tell you that with some certainty that they were astonished that it actually worked. But it took off, and it's now in its 54th year. We peaked our membership at about 200,000 people nationally. We run beer festivals all over the country. We have had book companies. We've spread our wings to all sorts of things. I don't think in the US you've really got the equivalent of beer consumer groups, but in Europe it's spread to other countries, and there are now beer consumer groups for about 17 different countries. And they get involved in anything from having a good time at beer festivals and on pub crawls. I don't think we're allowed to call them pub crawls anymore, but exploration tours. But they also get involved in quite serious stuff like lobbying government and trying to make changes to the law, etc. Where we're at currently, we've moved on from only cask ale. We are really in favor of what we call in the UK beers from the independent sector, similar to what you would call craft beer in the US. But the mechanics of our brewing industry are somewhat different. Safe to say that beer in the UK is doing not very well at all. We have the same issue that's happening globally, that we've got four companies in charge of 70% of the brewing and in effect in charge of the market as a whole. Independent brewers, craft brewers, do not get fair access to the market, and it's really reaching a point where we think something needs to be done about this. But having been in the business for 54 years, we have contacts, we know how to get things done, and we're going to make a pitch for trying to change that in law, amongst other things. So watch this space.
Now, back when I talked to Neil, at that time, it wasn't just about the beer itself, but where the beer is being served. And part of the mission, as I understood it at that time of CAMRA, was to protect the traditional pubs in the UK. Is that still a focus?
It's still very important to CAMRA, yeah. Cask ale, which was our first love, the serving of it is extremely important. And so if you look at the way that most people rate pubs, it's typically on what range of beers do they sell. Our focus in pubs when we do our ratings is very much on how well do they keep it, because cask ale is really quite difficult to keep. Well, it's very simple to keep, but you've got to do a whole bunch of simple rules well. So that's part of our focus. The natural habitat of cask ale is pubs, and pubs are a very important part of UK culture, but they're under a lot of stress at the moment. There's all sorts of taxes that are focused on pubs. There's been a recent mess up in the latest budget where they were trying to raise a bit of money by taxing pubs more, but they've ended up accidentally putting a massive tax burden on pubs at a time when they've been struggling for some years. But the pub is an important. I think it comes third or fourth on the list of reasons why people visit the UK. It's to go to pubs. I mean, that's how important it is. It's up there with cricket and other things like that. It's very British.
And but the pubs, or at least in the old days, the pubs were the public house. They were the cultural center of the areas where they were.
Yes, but the numbers have halved, I think, more or less in the last 40 years. So there are whole areas that are now. I live in a rural part of UK, Devon, big tourist area. It's something like 400 villages now in my county have got no pub. And in suburban parts of big cities, you can see whole estates with no pub. There's been a big shift of beer drinking away from pubs. When I joined CAMRA too many years ago to talk about, something like 85% of all the beer in the UK was served in pubs. Nowadays, over 50% comes from supermarkets, and pubs are probably about 35% of the market. So there's been huge social changes, and it's been a drift. It hasn't been something people have decided to get rid of. It's more that people have stopped going. Well, pubs started to be run in rather tedious ways. It became much more difficult to run a good pub, and these social changes have become a drift that became a flow. And if you ask people in the UK, do they want to get rid of pubs? They'll all say no, under no circumstances. But in practice, people have been drifting away from them. Partly cost, partly other factors. But so the pub remains important to us. We've got a whole section of our organization that deals almost entirely with preserving them and whatever. And that's covering everything from doing the nostalgia stuff, which everybody does. But more to the point, we've got some of the best people in the country at saving a pub through applying planning laws and knowing how to appeal for a change of use of premises, this sort of thing, very technical legal stuff. So we have to attack it from all angles, from the sort of hearts and minds stuff through to the high technical stuff, which is we're quite a mature consumer organization from that perspective.
The Brewers Association here in the United States is monitoring the situation, as they always do in craft beer and beer in general. And there's been a turn down in the market of craft beer, especially, and a lot of that is because of competition from mixed drinks and seltzers and legalized marijuana in areas and things like that. Are you seeing similar things happening with the trends over there?
The biggest trend up till very recently has been that beer lost its proportion of the alcohol. The alcohol consumption stayed roughly the same. Beer lost half of its stake in that. it went from about 60% of the alcohol market to 30%. That's been the biggest thing. In the last year or two, in last year, we're looking at figures that we're still trying to verify, but we think they're accurate. There was something like a 19% fall in the amount of beer produced in the UK in a single year last year.
Mm.
It's been dropping a couple of percent a year for quite a long time, but 19% is huge. But I was talking to colleagues in Germany, and they too have seen a double-digit percentage fall in the amount of beer being consumed in Germany, and and I'm pretty sure that's the same in the Netherlands as well. So we're looking at something strange happening. You can't account for all of that based on, oh, young people are drinking less, or the seltzer market, which I think is the term you use in the US. We don't really have an agreed term for it. Ready-to-drink beers, ready-to-drink drinks over here. Yeah, okay, it's gaining a bit, but it's not that massive. So the current trends with beers are defying explanation at the moment, but they're not good. Though having said that, one of the things we've discovered is that the proportion of beer produced by the independent sector, now, unlike the US, we had quite a healthy independent brewery sector back in the 1970s. It didn't totally die out because we never had prohibition. So but since 2004 to the present day, despite the independent sector, craft sector, not being able to get access to the market fairly, they've still grown production overall. So against all the odds, they've done okay. And that's going to be interesting. So what really needs to happen, if we could wave a magic wand, it would be for the market to get freed up from control by the four big brewers, independent breweries to get their head. I think that would be good for beer on the whole, because it would be you'd have some good fighting beers to, that's not a good phrase. I'm going to say that. You'd have some good quality beers to rival wines and interesting spirituous liquors. And it would give beer a second wind, I think.
Well, Omar, we're still interested in good beer. In fact,
Absolutely.
we're still making it. At least I think mine's good. What has drawn you to real ale and to cask beers?
I've always had I don't know, a strong affinity towards UK beers. I find them, um, extremely tasty while being simple and not too boozy. So I think I was drifting towards session ales, flavorful session ales,
Mm.
early on in my homebrewing career, if we can call it that. And when I discovered bitters and dark milds and English porters, I was like, this is exactly the kind of beer that I like. Something that's flavorful without being too over the top. And when you're like first find yourself into the field of American homebrewing and American craft beer, you're hit by all of these over the top beers, the aggressive IPA, especially like 15 years ago, the aggressive barrel aged stouts, and they were all over the place. And you crave some subtleness sometimes, and that's where I think UK beers kind of fit in perfectly. So that's what drew me in, I think.
But now you're facing some special challenges with with equipment that you're not familiar with, and
Yeah, yeah. A few years ago, I got myself I found uh, a salvage beer engine, which was in terrible condition. I think it had been in service at a DC beer bar, and it went into disuse. Someone was throwing it away out of their basement. I found it and I restored it and got it back into service. But I realized that in the process of rebuilding it, I realized there are a lot of components and moving parts and gaskets and washers and valves involved in the pump. So I got a little bit too concerned about food safety.
mm,
And so, like, I would make usually when I brew a batch of beer that I intend for using to serve as cask ale, I would put half of it in a small keg, carbonated to cask ale levels, 1 or 1.2 volumes of CO2, and I would keg the rest or bottle the rest the normal way that I would do to normal service, normal CO2 levels. And to consume a 2.5 gallon keg of beer in one sitting is, rather ill-advised. So let's say, I have a few friends over and I serve a few pints. Well, I'm going to be consuming this keg over the course of a week. So what do I do at the end of the night after I've served 4, 6 pints to myself and a few friends? What do I do? And I find that if I always flush the pump and I try to, empty it of beer, pull some clean water, maybe put some, alkaline brewery wash or something like that, OxyClean or then Star San. Well, it's a cumbersome process that I got to repeat every day while the keg is in service. And in the process, I'm also losing beer because the last pull, the first pull, uh, every part of the beer that's sitting in the pump that's going to be in contact with these sanitizing or cleaning agents is not going to be consumable. So it's a lot of time and a lot of lost beer compared to especially in proportion to a 2.5 gallon keg. So that started discouraging me actually from making cask ale. I started doing it only when I have, let's say, I'm hosting this month's meeting for the club. And I know that I'm going to have 15, 20 people over and I can get through that keg in one sitting. These are the only times now where I make cask ale because otherwise I feel it's a lot of work to keep it clean and sanitary. And I don't even know if I'm doing it properly. And that's scary because beer is food. If it spoils, well, for the most part, it's just going to be unpleasant, which kind of defeats the purpose of making beer. But it could also be dangerous if it starts growing mold because of all the nooks and crannies that are involved in the various corners of a pump. So that's where I'm at right now.
Well, let's get you talking to John, and you can ask him questions directly, please, because I don't have any experience with this. John, does this sound familiar? Is Omar worrying too much, or are there special challenges that come with?
So Omar's worrying a little bit too much, but a homebrew situation is very different from what a pub would have, be it a pub in the US or a pub here. The first thing that's like to happen in a pub, certainly over here, is that the hand pump will have a cooling jacket on it itself. Depends on the exact model of hand pump beer engine you've got. But a beer engine should have a cooling jacket on it or facility to fit one. If it hasn't got one, you can, if it's one of the well-known brands, you can normally retrofit them. And if you've got a cooler that's cooling your cask, you can use the same cooling to cool the jacket, the cylinder of your hand pump, your beer engine. And if you're doing that, there's no need to flush it at all. It's keeping the beer in your cylinder cool, and there should be no reason why you can't drink that the next day. But that's very much depending on your own technical setup and your own beer engine. But generally, as a food stuff, yes, beer is a food. It's actually a very low risk food. You're unlikely you're not going to die from anything. If you drink bad beer, you're not going to feel very well, but it's not considered a dangerous food stuff. So actually, at pub level, the authorities over here don't consider beer particularly risky. They don't demand massive hygiene out of pubs, just basic, semi-regular cleaning. I mean, typically, the best beer pubs here are going to be cleaning the hand pumps after every cask. So typically, a pub here will be going through a cask in 3 days, 3, 4 days. And the very best beer pubs will then run an alkaline beer line cleaner through that after every beer. More general recommendations are that you do that every 1 to 2 weeks. just to keep the lines on and keep the pump clean. There's nothing really about cask that means you should be doing anything particularly different to what you're doing to if you've got a keg dispenser, whether you've got a kegerator or a full home bar install. It's still the same deposits which are going to be deposited on your lines in your cylinder. It's bits of yeast, it's biofilm, proteins out your beer that's going to settle on the surfaces of your lines and on the surfaces of your pumps. So you're using the same cleaners and essentially the same kind of routine. If you're in a homebrew situation, you're normally brewing live beer that's got yeast in it. You don't have access to microfiltration, and if you've got microfiltration, then you worry a little bit less about cleaning because there's less to be deposited on your lines in your pump.
Omar, are you using a CO2 breather? Or are you replenishing the CO2 or replenishing the air or refilling the airspace of the cask with CO2 or just room air going into the cask?
So when I started, I was just venting the keg into the air. So it was I would put a quick disconnect on the gas in so that it sucks in air as I pull beer. But later basically brought a flexible water bladder that I would collapse, fill with CO2. It holds, I think, a gallon of CO2, and I would attach that to the disconnect. So that it's inflated, but at almost atmospheric pressure. So it doesn't push CO2 into the keg. It just allows it to draw CO2 from this bladder as I serve, and then I'll have to refill it again to get through the whole 2.5 gallon of beer that I have in the keg. It's a little cumbersome, but I think it works fine for cases where I expect the keg to last longer than 3 or 4 days when I start to worry about oxidation. But it's fascinating what John mentioned about the cooling jacket. The way I found my beer engine, it was not in any shape to have any of the attachments or accessories still on it. So I built an insulation chamber for it using foam and other home construction material. But because I was not aware that you can actually have a cooling jacket for them. But that's something that I'm going definitely to look up and see if I can install for it. So can I move on to another question? I think
Certainly.
what John mentioned, I think the tip on DLC is very useful. That's like the beer line cleaner. But it got me thinking, like in a keg setup, we also are encouraged to take apart the faucet and replace the gaskets and washers and O-rings in there. Is taking apart the pump something that is at all recommended or needed every, maybe not every keg, no, not every cask, but every 10 or every year or something like that?
No, it shouldn't be necessary. Although there's lots of nooks and crannies, that there's not meant to be that many little spaces where bacteria could grow. If you're regularly line cleaning with a normal alkaline line cleaner, that should be getting most of the deposits out. You will get a small amount left behind. You can get more heavy duty line cleaners. Pipeline Gold is a common brand here, which is available in the States as well. They're more deep cleaning. They will strip some of the things that a regular beer line cleaner doesn't take out. So you can use those typically once every 6 months, once a year, to give a more thorough clean. If your hand pump is not getting used very regularly, it's important to keep it clean. Make sure it's flushed well before you leave it to dry. Your biggest risk of damage to your hand pump is actually letting it dry out. If you let your hand pump dry out with beer in it, what can happen is the seals. So inside your hand pump, if you strip yours down, you'll see there's a glass cylinder, or a very glass-like material. If it's not actually glass, it'll be a very smooth plastic. with a piston in there with seals on it. If you let the hand pump dry out with beer in it, you risk these seals sticking to the side of that cylinder. When you try moving the cylinder, you can risk ripping bits of the seals off onto the side of the cylinder, which ultimately will stop it hulling beer. It will stop it sucking. So always, if you're leaving it out of service, always flush it very thoroughly and try and get as much of the moisture out of it as possible. That would be the key thing there. If a hand pump gets completely dried out, you can find that it'll actually stop sucking completely. The trick to that is actually to get water to the seals, get liquid to the seals, which is a strange situation. But you end up turning it upside down and pouring water into the spout to let it get liquid to the outside, the output side of the seals, and do the same through the input side. Take your beer line off and pour liquid into that. Let it sit for a couple of minutes just to soak the seals, and you can suddenly find the hand pump that wasn't pulling at all will suddenly start working. So yeah, don't let it dry out. Is your key. That in a pub situation here, there are chemicals you can get, certainly over here in the UK, that are actually designed for leaving in a beer engine and in beer lines for a long time. If you let beer lines dry out, they can crack and split. And if you get cracks in your beer line, that's when you start getting yeast and proteins embedded in the cracks in your line, and that's when you can start getting bad lines. You're not going to worry too much about a beer line. If a beer line gets damaged, you just replace it. It's not an expensive part of your system, but a cherished pump you're going to want to look after. If you do get a very, very dirty pump, you can strip it down. There are exploded diagrams on the wonderful thing that we have called the internet. For most of the common brands, and the Angram brands that are the most common kind of hand pumps of beer engines, you can get full exploded diagrams showing you how to do it. Just take it apart very carefully, take note exactly where everything came from, and put it back in the order it came in. Put it back in the order it came out of.
Yeah, that's exactly how I did it the first time. It came without manuals or instructions. I just took, 20 different pictures of everything and where it fits, and then traced that back to put everything back together. I still made a few mistakes, but gladly it worked.
And now you know. Now you've learned. So John, if when people are not using a CO2 breather or a device such as Omar is using and drawing in air from the environment, do you risk getting wild yeasts and bacterial contamination and things like that into the system, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's obviously a risk. A normal cask system, the surface of the beer is open to the atmosphere, so there's always a risk that you're going to draw in contaminants, bacteria that can spoil your beer. Ordinarily, in a normal pub service situation, in 3 or 4 days, you're not going to unlikely to get sufficient to actually cause a very bad spoilage. But if you're leaving a beer longer than that, there's an adage that cask beer should last 3 to 4 days. It depends on the beer. If you've got a 8% stout or a stronger beer, it's going to last longer. Naturally, alcohol is a preservative, and quite often you can find in those kind of beers, it won't actually oxidize first. It will actually be the bacteria that will turn the beer first. So you won't necessarily get that stale cardboard taste first. You might get the vinegar taste of it having actually got some bacteria in there. There are devices out there you can get called race ventilator spiles, which is like a little two-way valve, which you connect to your gas inlet. it lets any CO2 being generated by the beer out, but only pulls in when you actually need to replace some of the air in the line. So you can use them. That's a cheap way. They're about US price. I think I saw one on a US website about $18, something like that. That's a simple thing you can get. Or the cask breather solution, whether it's a rigged up one like Omar's come up with, which is very clever. But basically all a cask breather is just a very low pressure CO2 blanket. So if you've got a keg system with secondary regulators on it, you can just take a feed off your CO2 system, set your regulator down nice and low, talking 1 psi, and that's your cask breather set up there, and just put that on your in feed of your keg, and you've got a cask breather really.
Now, if you're replacing the air in your cask with CO2 in one way or the other, is it still real ale?
Yes, for a long time, CAMRA over here, purists were obsessed with it. If CO2 came anywhere near the beer, it would risk making it fizzy, and beer is not meant to be fizzy. A dozen or so years, about 10 years or so now, CAMRA finally was persuaded by people on the technical group and others that that's not really true. At atmospheric pressure, there's a small risk if a faulty cask aspirator applying a little bit too high a pressure. But generally, in some taste trials that were run, I think we did a trial at in Cambridge, we have a beer festival back about 15, 20 years ago. There were some trials run of a cask with a cask breather on it, cask open to air, and taste trials. A very, very small percentage of drinkers could tell the difference. So yes, it's still really a blanket, as long as it's not under a positive pressure. And about, was it now, Tim, 6 years ago, I think we actually changed the technical definition of real ale and cask ale to actually say so that it's positive pressure, which you don't want. Atmospheric pressure is fine.
So Tim, it sounds like the definitions are changing over time, and probably helpful to proprietors that they can help prolong the life of their product without risk of losing that.
Yes, I mean the biggest driver for changing definitions was that when the old definition been around decades, and was from back in the day when the only live beers were cask conditioned. In the intervening 30 years or so, in turn came along beers that conditioned in a sealed huge tank. Beers that condition, or we've always had bottle conditioned beers, but at the beginnings of CAMRA there were 5 or 6 left in the whole country, and before we knew it, we were up in the hundreds, and I think we've been north of 1,000 for quite a long time. Then there were can conditioned beers came along, and then keg conditioned beers. We can't think of any others that might come along, but the problem was that people were getting so used to cask conditioned beers being lowish carbonation, and that was part of their USP. The other forms of live beer are not low carbonation, and in fact, bottle conditioned beer is probably one of the highest levels of natural carbonation of any beer at all. So we had to split it apart. It gave us an opportunity to formalize some quite special things about cask ale, and then say something else about the generic family of all the beers that have live yeast in them. I do think this is not an issue that comes up very often, but for me it's one of the big differences between the beer tradition in Europe, including the UK, and beer tradition in North America, where your tradition is very much that the beer is perfect at the time of, or with a commercial beer, it's perfect at the time of canning or bottling or kegging. and then it can only go downhill after that. Our tradition of conditioning beers in the container, which in the UK is cask conditioned. We're just about the only country that does cask conditioned in any volume. But bottle conditioned beers are very popular, especially Belgium. Um, their beers, if you take a bottle conditioned beer in particular, it's okay when it's bottled. It gets better as the months and years go by. So the old Budweiser slogan of fresh beer is best does not apply to bottle conditioned beers. And I celebrate that. I think it's a great art to conditioning beers.
That's part of the fun of homebrewing is if you bottle condition your beers, if you prime at the time of bottling, it evolves over time. Of course, there is a point where things go off the rails, but it's part of the fun of it is trying to keep some of your beer around so that there's some left to sample over time.
I know a very accomplished American expat homebrewer in Brussels. And he has a certain spirit to him. He doesn't like to chuck stuff away unless it's absolutely necessary. And some of the relatively rare examples of a bad brew he just keeps for longer and longer and longer. And eventually, come 5 or 6 years in the bottle, it can come good.
That was my theory in the beginning, that my beers weren't bad, they just were young. Yeah. Omar, have we answered all your questions? Are you feeling better?
I think so. I think the main takeaway from this is to stop worrying too much and just relax, keep it cool, and just flush it every time now and then. But I do have one last question, and I know it's a bit of a debate in the UK. To both John and Tim, sparkler or no sparkler?
Depends what the beer's been brewed for. I'm in the north of England. Tim is very much in the south of England. So you will get different answers from the two of us.
Yes, I live in Devon, and when the CAMRA began 50 years ago, produced its first good beer guide, which was actually it's the national guide to cask ale around the UK. And the Devon entries from 1974, 60% of the pubs were serving the beer straight from the barrel. There were none of these newfangled hand pumps and beer engines. This was just straight from the cask. And you're starting to see it coming back in Devon, certainly, which I think is the best way. And you can't get a sparkler onto a gravity feed. It just can't be done.
It has become a very much a north-south divide thing in the UK. People in the north of the country, certainly north of England, are used to their beers coming through sparklers, through hand pumps. Even so, I've been explaining to Tim recently, he's never seen one, but we have a few bars now which serve cask conditioned beers through what would normally be a font, using a pump to pump it rather than a hand pump, using an electric or a gas powered pump. When Tim sees these beers in his part of the country, they just come out of a font that just looks like a keg font. If you see them in my part of the country, they have a long spout on them with a sparkler on the end of it. It is just what people are used to. When I started my beer drinking, I was going to beer festivals and I preferred beer straight out of the cask. It is perfectly possible to condition beer in the cask, so it's got plenty of life and does not need a sparkler. Theoretically, you can do things in the brewing, raise the hop profile a little bit, because the sparkler is it's knocking some of the CO2 out of the beer, but it's then trying to bring aroma into the head of the beer. So if you're doing that, then you can brew slightly differently, knowing it's going to be done like that. But I don't think many of the small brewers don't worry too much about they're going to brew a batch of beer. It's going to be served on a sparkler in Manchester. If they send any of it down to London, it's not going to be served on a sparkler down there. It's just good beer, and it's down to the skill of the publican to keep it well.
I, I think one of the things about cask ale is what Omar said near the beginning when you were saying you were drawn to it because these were basically lower strength beers. And I think the great thing about cask ale in the UK is that not just how it's served, but how it's kept. There's certain aspects of how it is mashed. There's certain aspects of the match up between the yeasts and the hops that are used, etc. I do think the British are the only people who can produce a really tasty beer at 3.5% alcohol by volume. A Belgian would throw his hands up in horror at that sort of idea of trying to make that. But it's a type of beer that perfected that, and that's if for no other reason. I think that's why I still consider it a world classic style, though unusually quite a low gravity one.
Yeah, I forgot to include non-alcoholic beers in the mix of competitive pressures being put on brewers nowadays. One last question on that, on trends, is non-alcoholic beer a thing in the UK, Tim?
It's arrived. I remember, some years back, 6-7 years back, the Brewers of Europe organization was going into. They were hugely enthusiastic about what the future of zero alcohol beers, and I rather spoiled their conference by saying that unless they came up with styles that tasted of something, then they were going to be on a loser. I have to say that really starting with Guinness, but there's been many others since then, we've got some really very tasty 0.0 and 0.5% beers. And yes, they are starting to connect with the market more than just a couple of percentage points. There's some parts of Britain where it may be up to almost 10% of beer. So I think they've got a future, and I think they've got a future because the people who can do wizard things with hops and certain other techniques have actually livened up that market. So I think unlike I'm old enough to remember the last time they were fashionable, and they were all pretty dreadful, and they gave you a hangover from whatever chemicals it was you had to put in there to stop the alcohol forming. But I think this era of non-alcoholic beers will last. Though I think they'll just be alternatives to beer drinkers on days when they don't want to drink alcohol, rather than seeing off proper beer as a rival.
One of the things that's happening on the technical side and then is the yeast manufacturers have got in on it, and the yeast manufacturers have now developed specialist yeasts for making alcohol-free and low-alcohol beers to get them a lot cleaner. They're typically a completely brewed alcohol-free beer. It'll be a very high mash temperature to stop the malt breaking down, stop the starches being produced, and then the yeast manufacturers are doing specialized yeasts that then help those beers actually still develop without actually fermenting the sugars. I'm not sufficiently technical on the brewing side to say that. The other thing that's actually happening on the technical side is the cost of dealcoholization plants is actually coming down significantly. So we're starting to see some of the larger independent breweries here can actually afford to put in the same reverse osmosis dealcoholization procedures that the big boys have had for years.
Yeah, we have one brewery in Bristol now. Bristol is a fabulous craft brewing city. It's got about 25 breweries actually within the city. And one of them has got it cost him just under $30,000 US kit from which he's making 0.5% alcohol by volume, the whole of their range.
Wow.
So I've yet to try the barley wine, non-alcoholic. But it basically sucks out the alcohol and water. They replace the water, and then because these guys are good, they're then having to match what else is missing from the flavor. So they have ways of getting the graininess back. They have ways of getting the hoppiness back, and even the yeastiness back. And they're getting quite good at it. So yeah, and these are relatively small players. They're not tiny breweries, but they're not huge by any manner of means.
Wow, it's encouraging. Yeah, anytime you can keep the monopoly out of the hands of the larger brewers is a good thing. Well, gentlemen, this has been a lot of fun, and this most of an hour has flown by, at least in my perception. Omar, I thank you again for the question, and it's always great to talk to you and to see you. And John and Tim, thank you very much for spending your time, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
It's been fun.
Thanks again to Omar, Tim, and John. Very generous of everybody to take time to talk. It's one of my life goals to go to an authentic British pub and have someone pull a pint of genuine real ale for me. One day. I don't know about soon, but one day. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. Please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. It's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.